Welcome to the Farm to School podcast, where you will hear stories of how youth thrive and farmers prosper when we learn how to grow, cook, and eat delicious, nutritious local foods in schools across the country and the world. I'm your co-host, Rick Sherman. Along with me, as always, is Michelle Markestein. And thanks for coming by. What follows is part 2 of our 2-part interview with Andony Melanthpoulos with Oregon State University. It's entitled, What's the Buzz in School Gardens? Part 2. Let's pick up right where we left off.
So everyone is caring about bees, and being in the school garden world, we're seeing it more and more, and people are interested in it. And there's a lot of different considerations going into it.
Thank you for that, Michelle, because this is a school garden, farm to school podcast. We were going to get there. But we were like...
After the chutney.
Yeah.
After the grammar chutney.
But... Andony, you have been very much involved in the schools, and tell us a little bit more about that journey.
Well, I would say that journey starts with Lauren Toby and the amazing group at Food Hero at OSU. That initiative, well, I actually think it started for me. I remember before meeting Lauren, meeting you, Rick, and trying to think about this. I was like, how can we provide some content to school gardens? Like, what's our role? And I couldn't figure it out. Like, I kept coming up with these ideas and they just weren't that great.
Well, you invited me to the pollination conference at OSU, and so I spoke there. And I think that was the first time I said, you guys should all have bee colonies in school gardens. And people are like, whoa, but we keep track of that. And I think at last count, we had like 60 school gardens that had some sort of pollinators like mason bees or honeybees or whatever, you know, there.
And we have a lot of school gardens that put in, they call them pollination gardens. So even if they're not also creating habitat, which they are more and more, they're creating foods. But we get that question a lot too.
But, Andony, tell us about that. Like, people sometimes can be squeamish about getting bees on school properties. Yeah,
for sure. And let me just put a bow on that last part. Yeah. It was Lauren who finally cracked the nut, and maybe we can come around back to it on how we could provide a kind of a framework for not only giving educators some resources to work with, but thinking about a pathway. But let's back up to that question. So I get it a lot. I'm school garden coordinator. I'm trying to convince the principal and the parents that having bees on as part of the school garden is going to be safe. This always comes up, and it's always this issue that everybody has. And I think the key parts to that are when it comes to honeybees, there is some risk. So honeybees can sting, unlike mason bees, which is another option, which I think people often overlook. But there's a number of counties in Oregon that have done a really good job of it.
Now, mason bees, I've always heard, they don't sting. They do sting, but just not.
You have to get it like in your palm of your hand, and you have to like squeeze. Like it will not. You can sit within. You can take your face within 2 inches of where they're flying in and out, and then we'll just like go around your nose because they're trying to get in. They're totally not defensive. Yeah.
Well, and I was at a garden last spring in Corvallis at College Hill High School, and I put my face by a hive, and one nailed me right in the center of my forehead.
Honeybee.
It was a honeybee. Yeah. Not a mason bee. So... But that goes to show you another time I was at Michelle's school near her house, 91 school in Canby, and I was asked to talk about something. And for some reason, they had bees, and the kids were flipping out just because a bee, run for your lives. And one landed on my finger, and I said, "Look, you guys, I'm so lucky. I got one to land. And I'm not going to lie, it could sting and it's going to hurt, But then, I was telling them all the wonderful things they do, and we need these guys to pollinate, our food so we can eat and everything. Pretty soon, all the kids were running around with their fingers out trying to get one. And one like, look, Mr. Sherman, look, I got one on my finger. So you model that behavior. And there might be some kids that do have an allergy or something. But
Yes.
usually the teacher, they know about that kid and they have, help nearby for them and stuff. And it tends not to be an issue, right? So
It all has to do with the placement of the colony, where it's going to be placed in the garden, setting some kind of a boundary around the colony, and having a beekeeper who's experienced. I know there's a number of commercial nurseries where the public is walking within a foot of a bee colony, and there's no issue.
Yeah.
It really does require some experience. I will say though, with mason bees, it requires there's zero. I really think the risk with mason bees is so low.
Yeah.
But the problem, I think, is when it comes to parents and administrators, they don't really know the difference between a yellow jacket and a bee.
Yeah.
And their thought of when you bring bees onto a school ground is those things that stung them in the ankle when they were mowing the grass.
Yeah.
That's what they're thinking of.
Maybe we should do a bee rebrand.
Yeah.
Mason.
Well, the good news,
I don't know, something.
The good news I see, like when you go to your big box stores, your Home Depots, your Fred Meyer Kroger's or whatever, I see mason bee houses all the time. They're the ones that have the little straws in them where they go in and they nest, and they could look like anything, bird houses or tubes or whatever.
Okay, so bees are cool. Bees pollinate, and people are increasingly interested in them, although they're worried about them. But let's be real. Bell time and school time is really, they already have limited instructional time there.
Yeah.
So where's the connection between educational standards and bees?
Well, this is where Lauren comes in. I think Food Hero has really, I've been amazed. I guess you folks had worked with Food Hero in the past and realized, what a powerhouse they are.
I'm
Michelle,
on the Food Hero team.
Could you explain what
yes.
Food Hero is for us, Michelle?
Well, at Oregon State University Extension, operates SNAP-Ed education in the state of Oregon through a partnership with the Department of Human Services and funded by the United States Department of Agriculture. It's worth saying all those different layers of government, because what it does is it really plays out to our SNAP-Ed. A lot of our programming comes down to Food Hero, and so you can Google it up.
It's foodhero.org.
Correct.
And I'll drop a link in the show notes, but that's it, foodhero.org.
And we do all kinds of amazing, delicious, tasty, affordable recipes. We now are really blowing out our school garden content related to different tip sheets, related to how-tos. And then our big push has been this bee book, working with you.
Bee book.
The bee book.
The bee book. Well, the bee book and the bee videos. And it is, I've just been astounded at the productivity. In some ways, it's one of the most exciting collaborations I've ever been involved with, because you just float an idea, and then about a few weeks later, there's a fully constructed page that's biologically accurate, is engaging, and written at a level for the students that I can't do. Like I can only write it like whatever my default level is, which I don't know what it is.
There's an app for that. They can actually tell you. And actually, at the time of this recording, it's one of our goals to get bee books into the hands of every single fourth grade student as part of their curriculum. So we're really excited about that partnership with the Department of Education and you and schools across the state.
It's remarkable at how I don't think there's another program like this in terms of education on pollinators anywhere in the nation. It's really rigorous. Like, the thing I love about it is, I remember the very first time the conversation started, I think it was around some kind of like bookmark with a puffy bee with like googly eyes. And I was like, I don't know if I can help you, but I didn't quite realize that you could turn something out that had covered every facet, connected it back to Oregon agriculture in a very meaningful way, not just a generic way like, oh, bees pollinate. It's like, here are the crops and here are the bees that visit them, and we're going to take you down the pathway of bee biodiversity in a way that you're not just going to be reiterating the stuff that you see on TikTok. You're going to learn something, and I thought that was a remarkable feat.
Thank you. And I do encourage our listeners to check it out because a lot of the things that are talked about in there, it's really an activity book you could do with your students or at home. And even though it's geared for fourth grade, you really can enjoy it as an adult. There's recipes and different activities and, focusing on many first foods are when wild bee pollinated, which is important. And you meet really funny bees in there like the squash and the cuckoo bee and other...
That was a great example. Just the last thing. I remember we were just in the hallway. I think, Rick, you were there. And we were talking about, wouldn't it be fun to have like these cards that you had as a child that you'd get a stack of cards with different properties, maybe airplanes or cars, and one has a big engine, one has a small engine, and you put the card down with somebody else, and you kind of like have a card game. And we cooked up in the hallway. It's in an insert. You can you can separate them out. They're perforated. These card deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got trading cards for bees, and even if you can't get a hard copy of it, it's all free on our website, and you just download it as a PDF.
Yep. Again, we'll leave links.
Amazing.
Yep.
So, what's the most common question you get from school gardeners and bees?
Oh, I get the question of first question that we've already covered is, how do I deal with this liability issue? And there, just a recap, I think it is with honeybees, you do require a little bit of skill. Like, you can't just pull off beekeeping. It is complicated. Yeah. You're going to need to set the colonies in a specific part of the garden to mitigate the risk. But when it comes to mason bees, the risk is low. Yep. And I think the great example of this is up at the schools in Washington County. Ron Spendle with the Master Gardeners has done a remarkable job of creating these display mason bees where the students can actually peel back the curtain and see the bees at work. So there's great examples of this, lower risk, an easier way to get in. And the bees are flying during the school year, which makes them ideal.
I was at a school garden conference, and we were up in a high school, and they had the bee colony on the outside of the building, and they had plexiglass on the inside of the classroom, so you could watch them doing their thing, their honeycombs and stuff, and you could watch them without disturbing them and see what they're doing. And they were coming, and it was on the second floor, way up top, so it was really cool.
Yeah, so they've mitigated the risk, and you've got this nice thing in the classroom where you can talk about bee biology.
Yeah, and then. Part two of Michelle's question, what do you get asked? Do you get asked like, what kind of plants shall I plant to attract bees or pollinators? And I remember when I came to your conference, I thought, any flower should do the trick, like mums or whatever. And it's like, no, they don't like those flowers really. Or so. What do you answer for that question?
Yeah, that is the second most asked question. So good, that was really timely. And I think. There's a couple principles. Obviously, first of all, Oregon State University does have a resource called Enhancing, it's going to be in the show notes, Enhancing Urban Landscapes for Pollinators. Okay. We have a number of plant lists, and the plant lists are arranged in a way to do two things. The first one is to get the ones that are attractive. So there are plants that are bee attractive, but also to stagger them through the year, because the bees are not just uniformly active. It's funny because there's some bees that are active in the spring, there's some bees that are active later in the summer, and there's some bees like honeybees and bumblebees that are active the year long. So you need to make sure that the bloom is going to be overlapping. There is an additional issue that some bees have very specific requirements. So one that everybody is going to have, and you'll see it now after I tell you, there are bees late in the summer, a whole genus of bees, the longhorn bees, genus Melisodes for the geeks out there.
Yeah, Melisodes.
Thank you.
They will only go to, thank you. They only go to composites. So you'll see them on a sunflower. When you grow sunflowers, you'll see these bees. The males have these ridiculously long antennae, and they'll just be going round and round the sunflower to all those little florets inside the flower. Yeah. The males have the long antenna. The females have these big hairy chaps on the back of their leg.
Okay.
They will only be found on those. So if you have none of those in your school garden, they won't show up.
I've noticed my artichokes when you grow an artichoke and it goes to bloom, it's this beautiful purple flower, and you get what I call the big giant bumblebees on those, and
very scientific.
Yeah, I don't know.
Rick is very scientific.
Big bumblebees.
I love it with the artichoke. It just jiggles, like the flowers are just jiggling. You can't quite see the bees. It's just like it's a jiggle of flower petals.
So to your point, I know I'm promoting a lot of Food Hero resources, but we really have so much on there. But we're going big on the sunflower, so we're blowing out a whole other toolkit that will be posted probably by the time of this recording.
Cool.
For that exact purpose. So are there any plants not to plant?
Yeah. Ooh.
Not to plant. No, I'm not a purist. I think it's totally okay there are some flowers that won't provide benefits for bees. So an example of this is you may have one example of this is double petals. So you may have roses, right? And the single petal roses are great. They have nectar and pollen available in them. But if you go for the double petaled roses, what they've done is they've bred the stamens, the male part that produces the pollen, into an extra row of petals. And so there's no more pollen left in the flower, and the bees can't get in. You could grow it because it's a pretty flower, and everybody should enjoy pretty flowers, but just be under no illusions.
Wow.
Yeah, I grow a purple variety of purple aster that's quite tall because it blooms in November, and we have a few days in November that warm up, and they're just swarmed with different varieties.
Those let me put a plug out. I think those purple asters we have the native ones. We have a number of native ones that can get a little aggressive in your garden, but we also have New England daisies. They are great for bees. They come at a time of year late in the season where everything's dried up, and these are really water-wise composites, and they're great. I agree. All hail the purple daisies.
All hail. Whatever works. Okay.
Hello, composites.
I had this sounds really good, and this has been one of my most fun podcasts. Is there any podcast you can go to? I don't know why that's funny. It was the most fun. Funnest? I was going to say funner.
Okay, I declare that funner is a word.
Funner.
No one agrees with it. Does anyone here agree with
It's funner. This episode is funner.
I think
it's funner.
Wow, this will never make the cut. So my question is there any podcast that you know of where you can tune in and listen to just pollination items all the time?
Yeah, you could. So
I'm setting him up here.
Thank you, Rick. I do have a podcast called Pollination. I did set it up. I don't know what your guys' motivation for the podcast. In fact,
I saw yours.
We're going to record a podcast after this with Michelle and Rick because I want to.
But I tune in there, folks.
That'll be even funner than this one.
Yeah.
But I was real funner. Yeah, see, it works. But I did it. My original motivations was I knew there was a lot of people doing things with pollinators across the state, but I didn't know them all, and I thought, I'm going to discipline myself to have a conversation with somebody new frequently so that I could learn what they're doing. So I did it with the anticipation there would be no listeners. I started the show with it's going to be janky and it's going to be rushed, but I'm going to just try to talk to as many people as I can. I've done it with podcasts outside the washrooms at a meeting where I've just said, hey, that talk you gave was great, and
pull out a phone.
We just start talking. So that it's like that.
But it turns out you have a lot of listeners and people who are very excited about literally pollination.
I know
it's good.
It was amazing. It is amazing to me, and I imagine the same thing that you found is that there's you start a podcast in some ways because you're trying to learn something, and then you find out people are interested.
Well, we actually are trying to solve for a problem. There was no Farm to School podcast, and we wanted to listen to one. And I was like, but there is none, so let's just make our own. And so with the idea, we would have dozens of listeners, And but hey, so far we've been in all 50 states and a couple dozen countries, and we're and it's basically for the people. We found out we have two audiences: the practitioners, the people like us, and food service and school garden coordinators. But the idea is to get Farm to School out and be more of a household world and give it out to the people that don't know about it at all. But that's us.
Well, I have to say, this is for those of you who can't see what I'm seeing. This is a very professional, awesome setup.
Very professional.
I'm going to go home and be sad about the state of my podcast. But this is
So as we're nearing the end of this podcast, what's one thing you want to make sure that everybody knows?
Oh, I have a couple things. So one thing is a lot of the work that we're doing in Oregon is really unique, and there's a license plate out there if you're in Oregon. That license plate supports the taxonomist who identifies all the strange and weird bees. So if you are at all interested in the stuff you've heard about and want to support it, just get one of those plates.
Yes, and I have that on your website too, and it'll be in the show notes. Sorry for those people outside of Oregon that can't get. I'm sure you might have your own in your state though. Right. So check that out. For every state has different license plates you get. That's a really good idea.
No one has a bee license plate. Come on.
No, probably. I don't know.
I don't think so.
No, they do, but they don't have one that was designed by a 16-year-old in Estacada.
Yeah,
oh,
that's true.
So amazing.
Yeah.
So what did you do? Did you have did you ask that student, or how did you? Was it a competition?
Have a contest?
Here's what we did. So it was during COVID. We started our program off, and we did it with Zoom. And there was this person with the camera off whose name was Merrick Stanton, and asked all these really complicated questions. I was sure he was 65 and he was German. And then one day he sent me a graphic novel of Anthophora bomboides, this bee that nests, and I realized he wasn't 65.
Whoa!
He was, and it turned out he was, at the time 14. And so when we were going to design the plate, we looked around to various people and we said, well, let's see if Merrick could draw one. And we had all these fancy designers, and Merrick's was just way more compelling.
Wow!
I love that.
Yeah, I want one for my car. So
I already know.
Yay!
I saw that.
And Andony does, and right outside our house. Okay, so thank you so much for being a part of our show, Andony. Sorry,
whatever your girlfriend and mom call you. And thank you, everyone, so much for listening today. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. Farm to School was written, directed, and produced by Rick Sherman and Michelle Markiston, and was made possible by a grant by the United States Department of Agriculture.
The content and ideas of the Farm to School podcast does not necessarily reflect the opinions of Oregon State University, Oregon Department of Education, or the United States Department of Agriculture. The USDA, Oregon Department of Ed, and Oregon State University are equal opportunity providers and employers.
Do you want to learn more about Farm to School? Check out other episodes, show notes, contact information, and much more by Googling Farm to School Podcast OSU, and that'll get you there.
It'll come right up. And we would love to hear from you. So if you go to that website, you can stop by, and there's a link. You can send us a message. You can tell us what else to have on our podcast, and that's about it.
Yeah, and go there and learn all about bees this time. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Andony.